Welcome to the Fathering Strong Deep Dive Discussions, where we take the latest topics posted on our blog site and with a little AI magic, thanks to Google's new Notebook LM podcast generator, provide you with an informative and interactive discussion. This week's Fathering Strong blog post, written by Urban Light Ministries president and co-founder Eli Williams, is the content source for this AI-generated conversation. Sit back and enjoy Meredith and Dylan as they deep dive and unpack today's topic.
Okay, so you know how much we all care about keeping our kids safe online, and how it can feel like a bit of a minefield sometimes. Like, where do you even start, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So today we're going to do a deep dive into this guide that I found super helpful. It's called How to Safeguard Your Child's Privacy Online by Pastor Eli Williams. And what I loved about it is that, yeah, it has all the usual stuff about tech and stuff, but it also goes deeper into like the emotional side of things, you know, like bullying and how to build trust with your kids around all this.
I think that's really key.
And it even gets into like a faith-based perspective at the end, which I thought was interesting. So it's like online safety meets like parenting philosophy almost.
It's true. Yeah, it takes a pretty unique approach.
So I think you guys are going to find this one really insightful.
Yeah, I think one of the things that sets this guide apart is that it's not just about setting up filters and blocks, which, you know, those are important, but it's really about raising kids who can think critically about what they see online.
Right, exactly. It's like giving them the tools to be savvy, you know, not just protected.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can't protect them from everything.
Definitely not.
And one of the things that really struck me was, you know how we often jump straight to the tech stuff, like parental controls and apps and all that?
Yeah, the tools.
But this guide really emphasizes that the most powerful tool is actually open communication with your kids. Like building that foundation of trust is paramount.
It is. It's like, it's almost like giving them that internal compass, you know, rather than just putting up all these external barriers.
I love that analogy. That's perfect. Because it's true. It's about equipping them to make good choices, not just preventing them from making bad ones.
Exactly.
And speaking of things that surprised me in this guide, there's this whole section on cyberbullying that goes way beyond like the usual name calling that we think of.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know there's such a thing as like cyberbullying by property damage?
Really?
Yeah, it's not physical, obviously, but it can be just as devastating for kids.
So what do you mean?
Well, we'll get into it more later, but just to give you an idea, imagine someone hacking into your kid's Minecraft account and like destroying all their creations.
Wow.
That's considered property damage in the cyber world.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it really does make you think about how, you know, we tend to think about bullying in those traditional terms, like physical or verbal. But technology just kind of blurs all those lines.
It does, and that's what's so fascinating about this guide. It really expands our understanding of what constitutes harm in a digital space.
For sure.
So, okay, we've talked about communication. We've touched on this whole new concept of cyberbullying, which we will come back to because it's really interesting. But now, let's get into some of the more practical stuff, like the tech tools and family rules that this guide recommends.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because I think that's what people are often looking for, like, okay, what can I actually do? So the guide does dive into parental controls, which, you know, can be helpful, especially for younger kids. It's about setting up those digital guardrails early on.
Right.
But what I found really interesting is how it explains things like strong passwords and two-factor authentication in a way that even young kids can understand.
Yeah, because that's important, right? Because sometimes that stuff can get really jargony and technical.
You totally can.
And it's like, how do you explain that to a 7-year-old?
Exactly. So can you give us an example of like how this guide makes it more kid-friendly?
Yeah, so instead of just saying, use a strong password, the guide suggests using analogies that kids can relate to, like comparing a strong password to a superhero's secret identity.
Oh, I like that.
Right, something that only they know that protects them from villains.
That's brilliant. That's so good. It makes it fun and memorable.
And it makes sense to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, now another practical point the guide talks about is where we keep devices in the home.
Yeah.
And it suggests keeping them in shared spaces. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's definitely a strategy that works well for some families. You know, it promotes transparency and can make it easier to have those open conversations about what kids are doing online. But of course, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, right?
No, definitely not. And I could see how like for older kids especially, who really value their privacy, that could create some tension.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's about finding that balance, I guess.
It is. It's about finding what works for your family.
Having those conversations.
Yeah, and it's a good starting point for a discussion about, what are our expectations around online safety and what feels comfortable for everyone.
Right. So it's not just about the rule itself, but the conversation it sparks.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to that whole theme of open communication.
It always does.
Because even with all the best tech tools in the world, that connection with your child is ultimately what matters most.
I totally agree. It's about empowering them to make good choices, not just restricting their access.
Absolutely. And speaking of empowering choices, let's talk about the guide's advice on social media, because I know that's a huge topic for parents these days.
Oh, yeah. It's a big one.
So what does the guide say about that?
It actually offers some really interesting perspectives. It actually suggests delaying social media until a certain age, and then starting with platforms that are designed for younger users, that have stricter privacy settings.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before. So I guess the idea is to kind of gradually introduce them to the social media world, rather than just throwing them in the deep end.
Exactly. It's about scaffolding their experience and giving them the tools and the maturity to handle the complexities of social media.
Makes sense. Now, before we move on from this section, I do want to touch on the topic of monitoring, like checking browser history, app usage, that kind of thing. Because I know that can be a bit of a sensitive area.
It is, yeah.
So how does the guide approach that?
It definitely acknowledges that it's a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
And it really stresses the importance of trust and balance. It's not about, spying on your kids, but rather about understanding their online activities and being able to identify any potential red flags.
So it's more about guidance than surveillance.
Exactly. It's about working together to create a safe and healthy online environment.
Which again circles back to that foundation of trust and communication.
Right. It all comes back to that.
I love that. Now, I know we briefly touched on cyberbullying earlier, but I really want to delve deeper into that section in the guide because I think it's one of the most valuable parts, honestly.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Are you ready to unpack that a bit more?
Absolutely. Let's dive in. So, okay, where we left off was cyberbullying, right?
Yeah, and I think this section of the guide is where it gets really eye-opening.
For sure.
Like, it really breaks down the different types of cyberbullying, highlighting some that, honestly, I didn't even know existed.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, we talked about the property damage thing, right?
Right, with the Minecraft and all that.
But it also goes into, like, indirect bullying
Right.
and even cyber attacks as forms of bullying.
Cyber attacks. Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
I know, right? It's not what you typically think of when you hear bullying. Like, I think more of, data breaches and hacking on a larger scale.
Right.
So how does that translate to, like, kids bullying each other?
Well, it's essentially using technology to, intimidate or harass or harm someone.
Okay.
So, for example, kids might use, denial of service attacks to kick someone offline while they're gaming.
Oh, wow.
Or, spread rumors using fake social media accounts.
That's messed up.
Yeah, so it's not just about stealing information or money. It's about using technology as a weapon to target someone.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it makes you realize how much bullying has evolved, right? Like, it's not just physical fights or nasty notes anymore.
I know.
It's like the whole online world has become another playground for this stuff.
It has, and that's why it's so hard to monitor and control, because it's happening everywhere.
Right, and that's where I think this guide's emphasis on open communication comes in. Like, we can't be everywhere our kids are online, but we can at least try to equip them with the tools to navigate those spaces safely.
Totally.
So part of that, obviously, is knowing what to do if they do encounter bullying. And this guide has some really clear, actionable advice for parents. It's like, okay, here's what you do if this happens.
Yeah, lay it on me.
So step one, and this is huge, is documentation.
Documentation.
Yes, like not just listening to your kid's experience, but actually gathering evidence of what's happening.
Yeah, like taking screenshots and stuff.
Exactly. Saving messages, recording all the details.
Okay.
The guide even uses the phrase, think of it like building a case file, because that documentation can be super valuable when you're reporting the bullying, whether it's to the platform itself or to the school.
Yeah, that makes sense, because sometimes it can be hard to prove that something happened online.
Right. And it's not about being distrustful of your kid. It's about having concrete evidence to support their claims.
For sure.
And it helps establish a pattern of behavior, which is important. So documentation, that's step one. Then obviously reporting is the next step.
Okay, so report it to who?
Well, first and foremost, to the platform where it's happening. So whether it's a social media site, a gaming app, whatever,
Right.
most of them have some kind of reporting mechanism. Although I'll admit they're not always easy to find.
No, they're not. It's like they hide them sometimes.
They do.
But I guess this guide tells you where to look then.
It does. It gives you specific tips on how to find those reporting features and how to use them effectively.
Good.
And it also reminds parents that, if you're having trouble, you can always contact the platform's support team directly.
Well, it's good to know.
Yeah, because sometimes you need a human to help you navigate all that.
For sure.
Now, besides reporting to the platform itself, you obviously also want to report it to the school, right?
Especially if it's happening offline too or spilling over.
Yeah, if it's impacting your child's school life in any way. And the guide really stresses the importance of working with the school to address the issue.
Yeah.
It even provides specific scripts for contacting the school and advocating for your child. I'm concerned about a situation involving my child and another student, and I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss it further.
Oh, that's helpful because sometimes it's hard to know, what to say.
Right, it takes the guesswork out of it. But it's not just about reporting and taking action, right? The guide also talks about the emotional side of things, like how to support your child emotionally when they're going through this.
Yeah, because that's huge.
It is, and it reminds parents to just listen to their kids without judgment, validate their feelings, reassure them that they're not alone.
Because sometimes that's all they need, right? Just to know that someone believes them and understands what they're going through.
Exactly, and it's so easy as parents to jump into problem-solving mode. But sometimes what kids need most is just to be heard. Totally.
And the guide acknowledges that, bullying can have a real impact on a child's self-esteem and mental well-being.
Yeah, it can be really damaging.
So it's crucial to provide that emotional support.
Yeah.
And help them develop coping mechanisms.
And remind them that it's not their fault.
Exactly. You did nothing wrong.
And it's okay to ask for help.
It's so important for them to know that.
It is, and encouraging them to speak up and seek help. That's a huge step in breaking the cycle of bullying.
For sure.
And the guide also emphasizes the importance of teaching kids how to be assertive and stand up for themselves.
Oh, interesting.
But in a safe and appropriate way, obviously.
Right.
So it's not just about protecting them, it's about empowering them to be their own advocates.
I like that.
And that ties back to, I think, the guide's overall message of building resilience. It's not about shielding kids from all adversity. It's about equipping them with the skills and mindset to navigate challenges effectively.
Because let's face it, they're going to face challenges. That's just part of life.
Right. And speaking of resilience, the guide takes a slightly different turn towards the end, focusing on faith as a source of strength.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, it includes, a Bible verse about strength and perseverance.
Okay.
And while that might not resonate with every reader, obviously, I can see how it could be really comforting and hopeful for those who do find solace in their faith.
Right, because everyone needs something to hold on to.
Yeah.
Especially when they're going through something tough.
Exactly. And it's about finding that strength and support in whatever form works best for you and your family.
Absolutely.
Because facing bullying, whether it's online or offline, it takes courage and a belief in yourself. And sometimes that belief can be bolstered by a spiritual foundation.
That's a good point.
So it's not just about the practical tips and strategies. It's also about nurturing that inner strength and resilience.
For sure.
Because ultimately, that's what will help kids thrive, both online and offline. So we've covered a lot today. From open communication and tech tools to the nuances of cyberbullying and the importance of emotional support. It's been a really enlightening deep dive into this guide, I think.
It has. It really has.
And it just shows how this guide goes beyond those, surface level tips and really grapples with the complexities of raising kids in the digital age.
It does.
And what struck me most is how it emphasizes the power of simple steps and open communication. It doesn't have to be overwhelming or complicated.
Sometimes the simplest things are the most effective.
Exactly. And I think that's a really empowering message for parents.
I agree.
It really does. It makes it feel manageable,
Yeah, totally.
It gives you a roadmap, not just a set of rules.
I like it.
And it all comes back to that core principle of talking to your kids, building that trust and understanding.
Absolutely. It's about giving them the knowledge and the tools to be safe and responsible online.
Right.
It's not about being afraid of technology. It's about using it wisely.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing is to just take action.
Okay.
Like, don't just listen to this and then forget about it. Think about one specific thing you can do today to improve your child's online safety.
I love that.
Maybe it's starting that conversation about online expectations. Or setting up some parental controls. Or even just like familiarizing yourself with the latest social media trends. Just do something. Because every step you take, no matter how small, it can make a difference.
And I think that's so important to remember because it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, right? Like the digital world is constantly changing and it can feel like a losing battle sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
But this guide really reminds us that we do have more control than we think, and we're not alone in this.
Definitely not.
There are resources out there. There are people who can help. And together, we can equip our kids to thrive in this digital world. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. We hope you found it helpful and that you feel a little more confident and informed about navigating the world of online safety with your kids.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Deep Dive Discussion, brought to you by Fathering Strong and Google's Notebook LM AI podcast generator. The content for this AI-generated conversation is this week's Fathering Strong blog post, written by Urban Light Ministries president and co-founder Eli Williams. For more information on this and other important topics and a wealth of free father-focused resources, please visit www.urbanlight.org.